Askat Ziganshin cut his leather boot into strips, each one about the width of a finger. He had done it before, and by that point there were not many boots left aboard. The strips went into a pot of water drawn straight out of the engine. The water was rusty. Ziganshin was 21 years old, and 3 other men sat in the hold watching him work. They had been adrift on the open Pacific for more than a month with a dead engine. Nobody was looking for them anymore. Their own Navy had stopped searching 2 weeks earlier. The question aboard the T-36 was how long boiled leather could keep 4 men alive. The second question was harder, and it was his to answer. Who decided how much each man got? Ziganshin was a junior sergeant from Tatarstan who had never commanded anybody before that January. He was not a sailor at all. He was a construction battalion soldier who moved cargo. His barge ran supplies from ships anchored offshore onto the beach at Iturup, in the Kuril Islands. The 3 privates serving under him were Philip Poplavsky, Anatoly Kryuchkovsky, and Ivan Fedotov. None of the 4 was older than 22. None of them had much experience of open water. The T-36 was 100 tons, 17 meters long, flat-bottomed, and good for 9 knots. It was built to work inside a sheltered bay, which is why it carried only 3 days of food. It was never meant to go out of sight of the island that it worked from. On the 17th of January 1960, the 4 of them were unloading a supply ship. The wind rose through the afternoon. By evening, it was being measured at 60 meters per second. The T-36 was driven hard against the shore, and one after another the mooring lines parted. They fought the storm for 10 hours, with Ziganshin working the engine to hold the hull off the rocks. Then the fuel ran out. The engine stopped, and the barge began to move away from Iturup on its own. Ziganshin got one last message out on the radio. Then the set failed for good. "We anticipate disaster," it said. "We cannot come ashore." Nothing more was heard from the T-36 for the next 49 days. The barge drifted southeast into the Kuroshio, the current the Japanese call the Black Current. It carried them out of the Kurils and into open water, moving at roughly a walking pace. On the second morning, they counted everything aboard and laid it out on the deck to see. 1 loaf of bread, a bucket of potatoes, a little cereal, and some dried peas. 1 tin of meat. Most of the potatoes had been soaked through with diesel fuel in the storm. Ziganshin divided the food into portions and set a ration that assumed nobody was coming. 3 days of provisions were made to last more than 3 weeks, and the arithmetic was his alone. There was no drinking water aboard except what the engine held in its cooling system. So they drank that, and it came out of the pipe brown and tasting of rust and metal. Later they rigged canvas across the deck to catch rain, and after that they drank rainwater. The stove burned wood pulled out of the barge itself, taken a piece at a time. By the middle of February there was no food left aboard the T-36 at all. On the 23rd they marked Soviet Army Day by smoking the last cigarette between them. There was nothing to eat that day. There was nothing to eat on any day after it. Ziganshin was the one who said it out loud, that they would have to start on the leather. He began with his own belt and cut it up in front of the other 3. Leather is not food. Boiled alone it stays hard, and the tanning chemicals sicken men. 1,400 miles behind them the search for the T-36 had already been called off. A hatch cover and an empty barrel had washed up on the shore back at Iturup. Officials concluded from that debris that the barge had gone down with all 4 men aboard. A second account has circulated ever since. It is the one most retellings prefer to tell. In that version, the search stopped because the T-36 had drifted into a closed missile range. The range did exist and they did cross it. The better sources still hold to the debris. Either way, the file was closed, the families were told. By some accounts, they were watched. A drowned soldier does not need surveillance. A soldier who has defected to the West does. None of the four aboard knew any of this. That week, they were still rationing belt leather. The Kearsarge boots were the real problem. The polish and the tanning had to come off first. Ziganshin worked out a method, and the four of them repeated it for the next month. The leather was cut into strips no wider than a finger. That alone took most of a day. The strips were scorched over the stove until the polish had blackened and burned away. Whatever was left of them after that went into the pot with the engine water. Boiled long enough, the leather softened into what Ziganshin later described as a kind of gum. They ate the belts first, and after the belts they ate the leather watch straps. Then they stripped the leather from a garment, the accordion one of the men had carried aboard. Then the boots. Each man was given exactly the same amount. Ziganshin measured it out himself every time. He kept the portions equal after the men could no longer stand up easily. Over the drift, each of them lost between 24 and 34 pounds in weight. The barge had no heating of any kind. The North Pacific in February sits close to freezing. They slept in the clothes they had and took turns watching the horizon from the deck. On the 2nd of March, a ship came up over that horizon and they got the stove smoking. They burned everything they could spare to make smoke. The ship passed without ever turning. On the 6th of March, a second ship appeared, and that one did exactly the same thing. Twice in 4 days they had been close enough to count a hull, and twice they were missed. By then there was very little left aboard to burn and almost nothing at all left to eat. On the 7th of March, a reconnaissance plane from an American carrier passed over them. The Navy's own account puts the barge 1,200 miles northwest of Wake Island. The carrier was the Kearsarge. It turned and sent its helicopters out to the barge. By that morning, the four men had been adrift on the Pacific for 49 days. They were too weak to climb. The Americans came aboard the barge to lift them off. Before they would board the American ship, the men asked for water. Then they washed and shaved. They were not coming aboard a foreign warship looking anything like castaways. Then Ziganshin asked the Americans for fuel and food so the four could sail the barge home. They were more than 1,000 miles from the nearest Soviet port at that point. The Americans declined and they took the four of them into San Francisco on the 15th of March. Time magazine ran them across its pages that spring as four simple Soviet lads. The American press had waited for defectors to step off that carrier, and it got none. Khrushchev cabled the Kearsarge to thank its commander for an expression of friendly relations. All four were given the Order of the Red Star once they were home again. A film about the drift came out in 1962. Children learned a rhyme from it. Yuri Gagarin, Ziganshin the Tatar. It went the cosmonaut and the sergeant in a single line. Ziganshin lived another 57 years, and he was asked about the boots for most of them. 6 boys were wrecked on a rock in the same ocean and lasted 15 months. That story is here.